web through this.
Easy for listening. I was able to do it. Easy for dancing. I'm not a great lover of cats. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Not me. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Hello and welcome to One-on-One Shadowboxing. Have your say. Today at the WTV studios, my guest is Jerry Georgatos, who is a researcher for suicide prevention and also a journalist for the National Indigenous Times. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you for having me on the show again, Tibor.
Jerry, we got a few discussions before this program with you on different Aboriginal issues and political issues. But now it is something which is probably a bigger issue than, I'm not saying the other issues are not big issues, but that's a very big issue, I think, in this year, which has just popped up in Western Australia. The state government would like to shut down remote indigenous settlements. Why does it happening, and what do you think about that?
Well, Tibor, it shouldn't be happening. I go in and out of communities, and for 30 years across this country, from Western New South Wales, Western Queensland, Northern Territory, the Arnhem, the Central Desert, the Kimberley in particular, our Western Deserts, Northern South Australia. I've been in and out of these communities. People want to be living where they are. If they wanted to leave, they leave of their own accord. So there's nothing stopping them from leaving. They are socially well functioning. They're full of camaraderie and love and the family union, community understandings, belonging to country identity, as any cultural group anywhere in the world. But what we have here in Western Australia is 274 remote communities. That's the highest concentration of remote communities in the nation. And Premier Colin Barnett just came out recently and said 100 to 150 of these communities need to be closed down because of a spat that they're having with the federal government over a municipal services bill. Now, historically, the municipal services bill for Aboriginal communities, First People communities, has been picked up by the federal government, whereas all other communities, towns, urban settings and so forth, has been picked up by the state government. So it's a jurisdictional responsibility spat. But the bill isn't that heavy. The bill for Western Australia, municipal bills for these communities, 274 remote communities, is $45 million per annum.
Per year?
Per year. $45 million per year for municipal services, power, water,
Yes.
sewerage, the collection of waste and the like. Now, the government's actually come out with a lot of propaganda, and I see it as propagandising because they've sold a message. Bill Marmion actually came out saying we've had a gun held to our head, we can't afford, by the federal government. Federal Minister Nigel Scullion has personally said to me, what's this business about holding a gun to their head or whatever, right? It's a jurisdictional responsibility. States have to treat, and territories have to treat their citizens equally. Now, I don't think anyone should be caught up in a spat. However they want to sort out the spats between themselves.
Between the federal and the
yes,
state
the
government,
federal and the state. The community should not be put at risk. Now, what the state government has actually come out and said that it's going to cost them, they've extrapolated figures, that's over 10 years it's going to cost them $10 billion, and over 20 years, $20 billion. That's what they're trying to do, the taxpayer argument, and scare the taxpayer.
So how did they came to that thing?
Good question. Because Tibor, 45 million multiplied by 10 is 450 million, multiplied by 20
billion.
is 900 million.
So it's not even 1 billion in 20 years.
So they're arguing forward estimate costs in that from the whole of cost of sustaining a community. So their existing cost burden for these communities. So there's a benefit for them to try and close these communities down in their mind and shut them down completely altogether to relieve themselves of other cost burdens that they have. But the actual cost of relocating people and then the cost then from social dysfunction will be greater than what it is. If they're saying
have they done any cost-benefit analysis in that shutting down the communities, the remote communities of the Aboriginal people?
I don't believe so, and even if they did, it would actually be the opposite of any cost-benefit. There would be a loss, because even just to build houses for all these people in other communities, or public housing stock, which won't happen because we don't do it for our homeless right now, and for the existing itinerants and homeless in all our regions around the country as it is. villages in the Kimberley, 7% of the Kimberley is actually homeless. 638 per 10,000 according to the 2011 census, Australian Bureau of Statistics. 638 per 10,000 are homeless in the Kimberley, 6.38%, but effectively about 7% are homeless. 95% of that homelessness is First Peoples. They're not doing anything about them. Outside natural disasters and civil strife, that's one of the world's highest homelessness rates. In what? In the world's 12th largest economy, second wealthiest nation on the planet per capita, and highest median wages. And Western Australia, the most affluent jurisdiction in the Commonwealth, and with the world's highest median wages, period, regionally.
How many regional communities we got outside of this 100, 150 or 200 Aboriginal regional communities?
Exact number on all the other communities. I don't know how many towns and communities there are throughout WA, but I have actually done a study of other communities with small populations.
Yes.
Some of the propaganda that they're putting out is some of these communities are very small in population. And he's actually said that around about 100 of these communities are only 2,000 people total. And there's a coterie of communities that he's actually said that actually have a population number of average of 7.5 or 8 people per community. Now, what he's actually done in that is actually also taken outstations. Outstations are last pastoral estates, farmlands, and of course they're going to be small family numbers. If we go to non-Aboriginal communities like Jirramakanup in the southwest, the population of that non-Aboriginal community, which is really an outstation, is 6. Are they going to close that down? Or are we going to go to Bailingup, which is 400 people or whatever? Are we going to close that down in the southwest? Or are we going to go to Quinnanup and close that down with 180 people? There's
Definitely no one is talking about closing down non-Aboriginal communities,
it's not talking
small
about,
communities.
Well, that's exactly it. It's a black targeted agenda. So look, if we get to the nutshell, it's about assimilation. Assimilation in this country hasn't changed as the premise and the origin of thinking of how to underwrite our policies to actually overcome as they see it, what's argued as Indigenous or the disadvantage that many First Peoples live in within marginalised. All those policies have failed. Assimilation, they've been trying now for 150, 200 years, the impost of actually annihilating another culture and bringing it into the mainstream. Stolen generations was assimilation. They wanted to extinguish and by segregation and apartheid, if I can use the language loosely, the black population, and those who are, as they said in those days, of mixed blood or of Aboriginal heritage but looked whiter, have them extinguish their blackness or whatever, right, by mixing it in and coming in through the mainstream and being taken up by white families or whatever. Right. That didn't work. They were not any more educated by 1997, those who were stolen generations victims or children of stolen generations victims, than those who were never removed from their families. So there was no spike or disparity between those who actually got university qualifications and those who had remained with their families or whatever. Right? There was no of the indicators in terms of economic and social development, in terms of high office, and in terms of various opportunity and in terms of social wealth in their station, not any better than all the others or whatever. Right? So, and there was no difference made whatsoever. But what we actually do have from that assimilationist policy is a spiral, as you will well know in every Australian, unless they've got blinkers on, that 28% of our prison population, national prison population, is actually made up of First People. Now, that was 14% of the total prison population in 1992 following the Royal Commission to Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. In 2014, we're now 28%. The women's prison population is actually now 33% comprised of First People, adult women. Now, that spike is 50% made up, comprised of victims of the stolen generation or the children of the victims of the stolen generation. So there's a legacy of trauma, and assimilation doesn't work. If we want to unfold in ways forward, we've got to look at it this way. You know, some of these communities that have been impacted by the colonial invaders and those who came, the British, are 7 and 8 generations removed, for instance, in many parts of the eastern seaboard. But in other communities where these impacts only hit last century, they're 2 and 3 and 4 generations only removed. For instance, in the Kimberley, in the Arnhem, and the Central Desert, and some people didn't see the white man till 70, 80 years ago, or whatever, right? Their impacts are much more recent, then therefore what
The coping with the impact is...
all those impacts are much more pronounced amongst
Yes.
them, much more pronounced. And then therefore they actually also figure highly in the resistance to imposts, as was the case 100 years ago and 150 years ago. And what I'm saying is, you know, other than the fact that they're finished up in our prisons with the highest, you know, now we have the high, Western Australia is the mother of all jailers of First Peoples in the world, whatever, if we go from a racialised lens. 1 in 13 of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander adult males in Western Australia is in prison today. 1 in 13. From a racialised lens, that's the highest in the world, whatever. And I'm originally from the Eastern Seaboard, but I've been in Western Australia 20 years. The more you travel across this country, west, the worse it gets for First People. And all the indicators prove that. The arrest rates, the imprisonment rates, the homelessness rates, and they finish up highest in Western Australia. So, for instance, imprisonment rates, we've got 2,600 per 100,000 in Western Australia for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. That's horrific when opposed to usually 100 or 150 per 100,000 for non-Aboriginal Australians. That 2,600 is 2,300 in South Australia. So this is why I'm saying it gets horrific as it goes across the country.
West, yes.
And in Western Australia, we're 3,660 per 100,000, and often we get to 4,000 per 100,000 and compete with the mother of all jailers, the United States of America. And the United States of America incarcerates its African Americans at 4,000 per 100,000, but it also incarcerates 1% of its total population, 3 million people, more than China, more than Russia. It's the mother of all jailers, and yet, demographically, where Australia does not compete with these high jailing rates for all its other citizens, for its First People, it competes with the mother of all jailers.
God bless America. They like law and order, and they can keep it, at least in the jail. On that note, Jerry, we have to go for a short break, and after the break, we're coming back with more discussions on that government decision to closing down the small communities in the West Australian outback.